Welcome to I Hate It Here, the podcast for HR and people professionals, making the hardest job in the world just a little bit easier. I'm Hibba Youssef. Hi, welcome back to another episode of the I Hate It Here podcast. If you are a weekly listener, you are in for a treat today. There is no guest. It is me. I am the guest on the podcast. If you hate the sound of my voice, now might be the right time to turn off the podcast. But if you are down to stick around, I have something lovely in store for you. I want to start this episode by acknowledging the events of the previous week. Last week, the United States elected their 47th president. And as I was sifting through the reactions of family, friends, coworkers, people online, feelings of excitement, feelings of sadness, there was a lot to think about. And the thing I kept coming back to was the mission of I Hate It Here. The mission of I Hate It Here is to make workplaces of the future better. And who we elect as president does impact the workplace. So for today's episode, I want to explore how U.S. presidents have directly influenced our workplaces through the laws that they have passed. We're going to go through history and explore 11 pivotal pieces of legislation that actually have changed the way HR operates in the United States. I'll give you a little commentary. We'll talk about why I think it's important, and maybe you'll leave this episode having learned something. But here's the thing. It's my first time trying this original episode, so if you hate it, I'm open to the feedback. Feel free to email me and tell me, please never do that again. I like it more when you talk to other people and not yourself. So let's dig into it. Internal, no vowels, pronounced internal, is the platform your creative team didn't know they needed until now. It helps you tap into the hidden passions of your employees with super personalized visual profiles. Want to know your junior designer is not just a designer, but also a Bravo Reddit mod, Bad Bunny stan, and TikTok-obsessed animator? Now you can. In seconds, you'll see your people as they see themselves and match them to projects they actually care about. Unlock all the talent sitting under your own roof. Head to seeyourpeople.com to learn more. Let's start with my first piece of legislation, the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, of 1938. In 1938, the country is recovering from the Great Depression. FDR is president, and he is passing his New Deal programs. He's really committed to economic reform because the country was in the Great Depression, obviously. Unemployment and poor working conditions were rampant, especially if you're talking about low-wage workers. And so what this act did was it established a 40-hour work week. Thank you. Thank you for that. That's why I work a 9 to 5. A minimum wage and mandatory overtime pay. Really, what this act did was it protected workers from exploitation, and it set these nationwide labor standards. So many Americans at that time were struggling to make ends meet, and this law actually provided economic security by ensuring those fair wages, and it created more stable working conditions. And HR at the time, which I don't think they were called HR, but the people doing HR, had to implement time tracking systems to track hours to make sure they were complying with these new wage regulations. And to this day, FLSA remains a very important part of our labor law. It's one of my favorite ones to go back to look at because I think a lot about how the reason we work a 40-hour work week, we've been working a 40-hour work week since the Industrial Revolution, and that 9 to 5 is what they decided. And I just think every day, thank God they didn't pick a 7-day work week because I wouldn't put it past people to actually suggest that and think that's a good idea. But that's a little bit about the FLSA. Passed in 1938. I'm going to do a little bit of a time jump. If you've ever seen Sliders, that TV show, I don't know why, I just had a moment in my head where I was thinking about Sliders, or Jumper, that terrible movie with Hayden Christensen. See, I told you this would be a fun episode. There's a little bit of history, a little bit of pop culture. I will keep my rambling to a minimum, the best I can. But let's do a little time jump to 1964. That year might stick in your head because it was a pivotal year for the civil rights movements. There were protests, there were marches, and there were demands of equality. And at that time, LBJ was president, Lyndon B. Johnson. And he was having to deal with all of this. And the country was at a turning point at the time. People really thought change had to happen. And so the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed. And Title VII, I always mix that one up. Roman numerals are very hard for me. It's Title VII of the Civil Rights Act made it illegal to discriminate in hiring, promotions, or employment practices based on our protected classes of religion, sex, race, national origin. And this was a huge step forward in workplace equality. And it was in response to the nationwide call for justice, social justice. And it was designed really to dismantle systemic discrimination. But as you and I both know, it still exists to this day. And systemic racism is a topic for another podcast episode or another 3-hour rant I could give about how it infiltrates our workplaces and impacts a lot of the things we do. But at the time, the Civil Rights Act was passed to make it illegal to discriminate in hiring, promotions, or any employment practices based on those protected classes I said. How did this impact HR? Well, I wasn't in HR at the time. I know, shocker to you, that I wasn't in HR in 1964. But HR at the time had to look at their recruiting policies and their promotion policies and honestly, all of their employment practices to ensure that there wasn't discrimination happening. And this law really set the foundation for a lot of the work we do today that guides and drives us forward when it comes to things like diversity, equity, and inclusion. On to our third piece of legislation, OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970. In 1970, the economy is booming. What a time to be alive. And as that was growing, there were also an alarming rise of workplace accidents. I wonder why. The president at the time, Richard Nixon, addressed these concerns for safety in factories and construction sites and passed OSHA. And it was enacted to set national standards for workplace safety. It actually gave the government the authority to inspect businesses and enforce safety regulations. I don't know if you listen to all my podcast episodes. If not, why not? And 2, you need to go listen to HR horror stories from this past season, because I actually read a story about safety regulations at work that I think you would find funny. But going back to OSHA, this law was aimed to reduce the rate of injuries and fatalities at work. And it was, the timing was very interesting. There was increasing industrialization. There were these factories that were rising up. It was the need to protect these workers from hazardous conditions. And it really held employers accountable for the safety of their employees. And that means there was an impact on HR. If we're being held accountable for the safety of employees, as we should, clearly that's going to impact our practices. And so HR people had to prioritize workplace safety. We had to have training programs and safety protocols. And even to this day, OSHA remains a critical part of our compliance responsibilities, especially if you're working in a high-risk industry. OSHA governs how you get to stay safe. Okay. Let's talk about another part of HR, another thing that impacts HR. Everything impacts HR. The world is HR. Just kidding. I'm going to make sure they leave that in and don't edit it out so you get a good laugh about my spiraling. The Employee Retirement Income Security Act, ERISA, 1974. It's 1974. What a time to be alive. There are all these scandals involving companies mismanaging retirement funds, and employees are growing concerned about the security of their pensions. Naturally, I would be mortified if my company mismanaged my retirement fund and suddenly I had no security whatsoever. So all of this prompts President Ford to take action. People at that time, employees were demanding that there were protections for their hardly-earned benefits. And so ERISA established regulations for private sector pension and health plans. And so there were safeguarded employees' retirement savings. Well, that was a tongue twister for me. The law required companies to adhere and disclose financial information. That came out weird. The law... Oh my God. Okay. The law had some impact on companies. Basically, it required companies to adhere to fiduciary standards, thank you, and also disclose financial information that they had to disclose. And it then was designed, ERISA was then designed to protect employees from losing their pensions due to that poor management, or if companies were going bankrupt. Get it? Does that make sense? My tongue twister really confused me for a second. How did this impact HR? Well, we had to develop new protocols for benefits management. And it actually, to this day, ERISA continues to influence how we manage 401k plans and other retirement benefits we offer. I'll let that settle for a second. 1974. Still impacts how we do work today. What a time to be alive. Let's do a bit of a time jump to 1990. The 90s were a good time. I loved them. I love the fashion, the music, the television shows. The Americans with Disability Act, ADA, gets passed in 1990. And at that time, President George H.W. Bush signs in the act into law and called it a monumental moment for equal rights. And it prohibits the discrimination against individuals with disabilities in the workplace. And I think this is very important. It requires employers to provide reasonable accommodations. This was a major step forward for things like inclusivity and accessibility. And it had an impact on HR. Teams had to rethink job descriptions, their recruiting process, office layouts, and make sure that they were compliant and able to provide reasonable accommodations. And it remains a critical part of why we are able to foster inclusive workplaces.
For 12 years, the world's most innovative brands have trusted Working Not Working to find top-tier creative talent. Now they're helping you keep that talent with Internal. No vowels, pronounced internal. Internal is your go-to platform for unlocking the hidden passions of your team. With super personalized profiles, you can dig into your people's ambitions, interests, and secret skills in seconds. Who knew your project manager was a national champion pickleball player, D&D dungeon master, and a karaoke queen? Visit seeyourpeople.com and start matching your team's passion to the work that lights them up.
Going to 1993, the Family and Medical Leave Act. I promise you, I can do words today, maybe on the podcast. It's weird when you're by yourself and you have to fill all the silence. Just very interesting. Okay, so the Family and Medical Leave Act, 1993. In the 90s, there was a shift forward to focusing on work-life balance and family-friendly policies. The U.S. definitely lags behind all the other countries in supporting employees' personal needs. If you're bored and you ever want to look at European countries and what employee protections they have versus what we have in the U.S., that's very interesting. But we are one of 6 nations that does not have a form of paid family maternal policies. Paid maternal leave policies. Words are so hard for me today. God, I'm feeling a lot of pressure being on my own on this episode. Anyways, so FMLA, Bill Clinton signs that in as part of his agenda to help working families. What FMLA does, I think all of us know this, but I'll repeat it just for those that might not know what FMLA does. It provides eligible employees, keyword there, eligible employees, with up to 12 weeks of unpaid job protected leave for family or medical reasons. It was a huge step forward in helping protect and support workers during life's major moments. And it was really designed to support families who were facing the choice of choosing between their jobs or their health. I never want someone to have to make that choice. And HR departments had to develop policies for leave management. We had to ensure that we had the job protections in place for any employees that were eligible. And today, FMLA is still really critical to employees. Some mothers have to use FMLA to take their leave. Just let that noodle for a second because we don't have a paid version of it, and that's a rant for another day. Anyways, let's do a little time jump from the 90s to the 2010s. What a formidable time to be alive. In 2010, the country is still recovering from a bit of a recession. A bit of a recession was probably an understatement of the year. Healthcare costs were skyrocketing, and President Barack Obama aims to expand everyone's access to health care. And so he passes the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, and it becomes one of the most significant healthcare reforms, and probably one of the most contentious ones. The ACA set a mandate that any employers with 50 or more employees must provide health insurance, or they have to face penalties. And really, at its core, it was designed to reduce the number of uninsured Americans, because uninsured Americans place the strain on emergency health services and drive our costs to go up. So in a nutshell, the ACA was there to help get more people insured. But it was a bit complicated, and HR teams that weren't prepared had to navigate complex healthcare requirements. Every open enrollment, I read through all those documents and everything. And I work in HR, and this is part of my job. And I still feel like benefits are a mystery to a lot of people. But after ACA was passed, a lot of HR teams had to navigate that. They had to understand if they were compliant with all the new regulations. And to this day, like, a lot of people feel a certain way about the ACA, but it really impacted HR and our benefits management. Let's talk a little bit about one of my favorite topics, pay equity. So in 2009, the country was really focused on addressing wage disparities, especially for women and underrepresented groups. The president at that time, Barack Obama, signs in the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Paid Act, Ledbetter, as one of his first acts in office. And the act is named after Lilly Ledbetter, a woman who discovered that after years of work, that she had been paid less than her male colleagues. And I wish you could see me right now, because my head is in my hands. And honestly, if I had been her, the act would have been called I Fucking Hate You All Pay Act of 2009, because I would demand it be called that instead of my name. Or maybe I'd want my name, I don't know. But after discovering she had been paid less than her male colleagues, and the act essentially extended the statute of limitations, giving employees more time to file an equal pay lawsuit and challenge pay discrimination. And pay inequity had been a persistent issue, and some would say, still an issue today. But it was a persistent issue at the time, and this act was aimed to provide workers with more of an opportunity and time to address those disparities. God. Sorry, I need to sit with that for a minute. How did this impact HR? A lot of HR departments had to begin prioritizing pay equity audits and had to ensure that there was transparency in compensation practices to avoid any potential issues that they might encounter or lawsuits. And it really did reinforce the need for fair and equitable pay compensation practices. But you and I both know that that's not the case, that a lot of teams still struggle with fair and equitable pay practices. But there's a law that gives the employees more time to challenge those pay discrimination. And I think we will potentially see more states pass pay transparency laws that will require HR teams to get even better and smarter about compensation practices to ensure that we're doing pay equity audits frequently and that we are remedying them the way we see fit. Or the way we should do it, honestly, not the way we see fit, because some people wouldn't change anything. I want to talk a little bit about the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. So 2023, I know, I cannot believe that was last year. I feel like we've just gone through 70 years of history. We have. In 2023, let's talk a little bit about this act being passed. President Biden signed the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act into law. And this came after years and years of advocacy that we needed to treat pregnant employees better in the workplace. And this law was passed, and it was required employers to provide reasonable accommodations for any pregnant employees. And these could be anything like breaks, time off for medical appointments, modified duties. And workers need to have those accommodations by law. And they're despite there being already existing protections, like many workers were denied these accommodations. And so the law was passed to ensure that pregnant employees could maintain their jobs and still prioritize their health. Isn't that grand? And when it was passed, a lot of HR teams were already doing the right thing. They already had policies in place to accommodate pregnant workers. They already were educating their managers on things like compliance and making sure if somebody says they have to take time off to go to an appointment that you don't say no because you actually can't. And I don't know, maybe you shouldn't morally. Just let the person go to the doctor's appointment. But it did have an impact on organizations, and they had to ensure they had clear policies in place. So we've just taken a journey. You've heard me drop a few presidents' names. You've heard me talk about the changes that they have made. You heard me do a little bit of time jumping, slider style. And what have you learned? I hope you've learned that presidents really do impact work. I hope that you've taken a moment to realize how much they impact work. And I hope you realize that who you choose potentially could have implications down the line. I don't know what 2025 holds. And this feels like a heavy moment for a lot of people. And I guess I want to end the episode on maybe a high note. I don't really want to even call it a high note, to be honest, but I want to end the episode just reiterating what the mission of I Hate It Here has always been. It's to build better workplaces for the future. And also today or tomorrow, because tomorrow was the future, but it's to build better workplaces. And in order to do that, HR people have to be aware of a lot of things. And I think next year might be a really interesting one for legislation that could really impact how we do work. So with that, please take care of yourself. Please let me know if you liked this episode. Just a little bit of a history lesson. I wish I could have included more fun pop culture facts, maybe next time. And just take a moment to take care of yourself. I think it's really easy to get wrapped up in the day-to-day and to forget that there are people out there that are really struggling. And as HR people, I feel like we always take care of everyone first before we take care of ourselves. So this is your reminder to take care of yourself, be selfish, and make sure you are doing what you need to do to feel good about yourself. I hope you join me next week. We'll dive back into Zone of Genius, and I don't know, maybe this was fun for you. If not, you know what to do. And if you hated this, maybe just be nice to me when you email me that you hate this. Anyways, have a great week. I'll see you soon, and you got this.
Thanks for tuning in. Keep up with all the latest HR resources by subscribing on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen. And if you love I Hate It Here, tell an HR friend. I'll see you next time.